Remember that we just finished talking about the self, and we said that there are actually four functions of the self, and we talked about three of them. The fourth, as I said before, was called self justification, and I said another word for that is dissonance. However, dissonance is so important that it actually deserves its own topic and its own unit and its own chapter in your book, nonetheless. So, what this is now is dissonance is we're going to first define it and talk about the first classic study that ever did anything on this. And the second thing that we're going to talk about is going to be how we deal with the dissonance that we have. All right. So, what dissonance is, let's define it. Dissonance is when you have two opposing attitudes, two opposing beliefs, or two opposing behaviors, or any combination of that. All right. And when they're opposed to each other, that is dissonance. All right. So let me give you an example. An example would be like you're on a diet, but you want to eat. Or you are a Republican, but you hate Trump. Or you're a doctor who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day. What you have in all these examples, and there's thousands more, is you have two opposing viewpoints, two opposing beliefs or attitudes or behaviors or whatever, and you have to justify that. All right, you have to work through that. So that's what cognitive dissonance is. So let's talk about the first study that really dealt with this, and this is classic stuff right here. The first study was done by Festinger and Carl Smith. This is the same Festinger that did social comparison theory. I'm biased because I think even though Kurt Lewin is the founder of social psych, I think Festinger was the single most important social psychologist ever. And I'm proud, I guess, to say that he's my academic great-grandfather. So I was trained by Anderson. Anderson was trained by Carl Smith, the same Carl Smith you see here. And Carl Smith was trained by Festinger, and Festinger was trained by Lewin. So he's my academic great-grandfather, which I think is kind of cool. And I could see the results of that trickling down. Like, Lewin was a big theory guy. He passed it on to Festinger. Festinger was a big theory guy, passed it on to Carl Smith. Carl Smith passed that on to my advisor, and my advisor shoved that down my throat for the 5 years that I worked for him. So it's kind of interesting how that all plays out. But needless to say, this is the first study, 1957, Festinger, Carl Smith. What they did is they had participants complete a very boring peg task. All right. So here's what participants did actually. In the peg task, so imagine a big board like this. Imagine this is like a huge kind of board on your wall, like a bulletin board. And what there are pegs like diamonds, squares, triangles, stuff like that. And what a participant's job was to grab right here and rotate it 90 degrees, just turn it. And then they had to go to this one, 90 degrees, turn it. This one, 90 degrees, turn it. And then they had to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. All right, for several minutes. All right. This was boring. My 2-year-old, he's almost 2, he could do this task. So imagine an 18, 19-year-old kid in college doing this. I mean, it's way, way beneath them. So it's really easy to do. And they did this for for several minutes. So it was quite a long amount of time to be bored. Now, after they did this task, participants were randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions. In the control condition, there was no money given whatsoever. In the experimental condition, for their time, they were given $1. And then for the second experimental condition, for their time, they were given $20. All right. Now, here's the deal with all of this. All right. So what happened was for these, so these 2 groups right here, they got paid. This group got nothing. And then what happened is they all left. However, the deal was for getting paid, these 2 groups, they had to lie. So let's say this is the participant and the researcher. Okay. This is the room, the experimental room they're in. There's the doorknob. Here's the waiting room. there was another participant in the waiting room waiting to do this study. When the participant left the room for getting paid, they had to walk up to this person and tell them that this task was really, really, really exciting and fun. All right. Once again, the control participants, they didn't have to do this. They just left the door and left the room. They didn't tell anybody. Now, after that was all over, right before, so this is like the door to the lab room here. So this is how you exit. Right before, and this is for all participants now, when they got to the door, they were told, whoa, wait a minute. I need you to fill out one questionnaire for me first. I need you to tell me how enjoyable was the task you did. How enjoyable was that peg thing? All right, so does that make sense to everybody with what they're doing? So what we have three conditions. Everyone did the peg task. After the peg task, everyone got to leave the room. However, for those who got paid the money, they had to lie to the next person before leaving. And before everyone left, they all had to fill out this dependent variable, how enjoyable was the task. And I want you to think about this. So who's going to be a dissonant person here? All right, so a dissonance here would mean that if someone left the room having done this boring peg task, all right, so someone just did the peg task, they're bored to tears, they leave. If they have to lie to somebody and say, that was the most fun I've ever had, that's dissonance, where you know it's boring, but you just said it's a lot of fun. Those are two competing cognitions that go against each other, and that's where the dissonance comes from. So those in the control condition, they should not be dissonant at all. There should be zero dissonance for these people here because they never had to lie. They did this boring thing and left. So they should rate this very low. So they should rate this, somewhere below 0. However, because they're not dissonant. However, these two people should be dissonant. All right, these two people should be dissonant. One thing I'm going to say, which I read an article about this, years ago, and they said that, so this was done, published in 57, so it's probably done in like 55. With inflation, this would actually be like $20, and this would relate to something like, I think I read like 150. Don't quote me on that number, but something pretty high. All right, So let's go over the results. All right, so this is from their table. I'm not going to have you memorize that. Don't worry about that. I just wanted you to see kind of how it looked. Here's when I graph the enjoyable. So I'm graphing these numbers here. You get something like this. So let's go through each condition real quick. So like we said, the control condition, they're not dissonant. So remember, we said that it should be negative. And 0, you can see, is this line right here. And this bar is below 0. So in other words, the control people, they thought it was boring and they rated it boring. They did not like it. That makes sense. But look at this group here. These are the people who lied about it being a lot of fun to the new participant. They did the boring peg task, they lied about it, and then afterwards, look how enjoyable they rated it. All right, look how enjoyable it is. Look how high that bar is. So these people are doing something. What do you think they're doing to resolve the dissonance they feel? What do you think they're doing? Well, if you think about it, probably what they're doing is they're saying, this is a boring task. I just told someone it was fun. So as they're leaving, they're probably just like, you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought. It wasn't awful. And that's how you resolve your dissonance. You change your mind. You resolved that dissonance by saying, you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I mean, it wasn't terrible. So I'm going to give it a 1.35. But look at these. Oh, let me get rid of this real quick. Look at these guys in the $20 condition, though. They also lied, but they rated it really low. All right? We're going to talk about why that's the case in a second. But there's a couple important things from this graph. Number one, this shows... Number one, that this bar right here does show that the task was really boring. This bar here shows dissonance. You changed your mind to resolve it. And this here shows an interesting effect that we'll bring up in a second. All right? And that's what the Festinger-Carl-Smith study was all about. It was all about this dissonance. Now let's dive into this. So why? Why do we have this dissonance? So let's talk about the $1 versus the $20 group. Now, I hope everyone understands the difference between the control condition and the $1 group. We just talked about it. The control condition, they're not dissonant. The $1 condition, they are extremely dissonant, right? So who is more dissonant then, the $1 group or the $20 group? Well, clearly it's the one. We know that because that bar on that graph was so high. And here's what's going on. Think about what they did. They did a very boring task and got paid nothing for it. They got paid something, but it was so small. They did this boring task that they got paid to lie for, and the money wasn't that much. And so when the money wasn't that much, you still have that dissonance. You told the next person it was interesting, but you personally thought it sucked. You thought it was awful. So now you have dissonance, and now you have to deal with your dissonance. And what you do is you change your belief. This is why these people were just like, you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. This is called internal justification. Think about what this means, is that internally you're fighting with yourself. You're saying that, you think it's a boring task, but you just said it was so much fun. Now you're fighting within yourself, and you have to deal with that. And you have to, quote unquote, internally justify that. And by internally justifying, you're going to change your belief and say, it wasn't as boring as I thought. It was all right. It was kind of fun. And then you rate it like we saw in the previous graph. But how come the $20 people didn't do that? The $20 people, they did the exact same thing. They lied, right? So they should have dissonance too. But what does the $20 do? Well, they were dissonant, but they didn't have to deal with it inside, all right? They weren't fighting themselves inside. They say to themselves, at least, they tell the other person it was a lot of fun when they thought it was boring, but now they lied. So they still lied, but they're just like, you know what? I just got paid a lot of money, so we're good. We're good. This is termed external justification, where there's no internal struggle because you're just like, hey, you pay me that much, I'll do whatever you want. I'll say whatever you want. You're going to give me $20 in 1955? Sure. I'll tell this person you lied. I'll tell this person anything you want, and we'll be good to go. So even though there's dissonance because they lied, they don't feel it. They don't feel bad. They don't feel that heartache. They don't feel that need to justify because they're just like, I just got paid a crap ton of money. So guess what? Sure, I'll lie to them. And then they don't feel bad about it. That's termed external justification. There's external factors from the environment that are trumping any sort of that dissonant feeling that you have. And that explains, if we go back, that explains here, where's my pen? That explains this group here. They didn't have to lie. So therefore, they're still going to rate this as lower than 0, not fun. And they're going to do that because of the amount of money they're given. Even though they don't have to internally justify what they did. If they did have to do that, then this bar here, right, would match this bar here. But you don't see that. And that's what's really cool about the Festinger-Carl Smith study, is that what you have is you have these instances where you have internal versus external justifications, okay? Now, here's what we know about dissonance, all right? Dissonance does not feel good. Research has actually shown that when you are experiencing dissonance, so when your attitudes, cognitions, beliefs, behaviors, whatever, if they're going against each other, you actually feel stressed, and you actually feel arousal, like you actually physically feel it. All right, and this is not a good feeling, everybody. Think about it. If you've ever done something where you've lied to someone, or you've done something immoral, something against your moral standards, all right, you feel that weight. You feel the arousal. You feel that weight on your chest. If you just lied to someone, you feel it. If you just yelled, like if I just yelled at my son for no reason, that's my belief I'm a good dad going against the behavior where I yelled at my son for no reason. I feel that stress. I feel that weight, and that does not feel good. And we know that one of the basic human motivations is we need to feel good. So whenever we are in a dissonant state, every one of us is motivated to get rid of that dissonance and return to something called consonance. Consonance is where everything is aligned. It's the opposite of dissonance. All right, so we need this. Now, there are 3 ways that we can do it. We can change our behavior, we can justify our behavior, or we can, by adding cognitions, or we can justify our behavior by changing them. And we're going to talk about each of those shortly.